Hey, this week we talk about Sparky Linux for your desktop environment hopping needs. We cover the IPO that may be coming for Fedora. Then there's lots of Wayland, Vulkan, and AV1 news to cover. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 137, recorded Saturday, February 3rd. It's always memory, or DNS.
This show is brought to you by members like you. Thanks.
Hey, howdy, it is Saturday, and you know what that means. It is time for some Linux geekiness to happen. It's going to be a great show today. It's not just me, of course. It's me, we've got Jeff, and we've got a new face. We've got David Ruggles. Hey, David and Jeff, welcome to both of you.
Glad to be here.
So awesome to be here.
David talked to me when he asked about doing it. One of the things he said is that he could give me his, how did you put it, your Linux credentials, your bona fides. I'm curious, what are your bona fides? I'm sure folks would love to hear it.
Now, see, that's not fair because this was with no warning. So I haven't had time to work it all up. No. So my first bona fide is I have a gray beard. I grew up with IT in the late 80s, early 90s. And back then, the gray beards were the guys that you respected. They were the Unix geeks. They were the fathers of the internet. My father was an electronics instructor at a local community college here in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And when computers and the internet came in, they came into the electronics department. So I got to, at a relatively young age, start playing around with Unix and Bind, System V and the Berkeley system. And so I've kind of grown up with it. Oh, wow. I was in a computer room midnight 1999 when we all thought the computers were going to crash and we needed to be on standby. I mean, and since then, and I've actually got a story today, we're going to touch on Asterisk and SIP. I was a committer on the Asterisk project for a little while.
Oh, cool.
And as an aside, you've mentioned that if you start committing to the kernel, you will get job offers. I actually got a job offer because I was committing to Asterisk. And so I worked for an international telecom out of New York for a while, remote. Cool. I never actually moved to New York. And so as I've said many times in the comments, I'm more of a user on the Unix side, Linux side. I don't, I'm not a core programmer. I program in Python. Most of what I do a lot of open source stuff. Most of what I do could be considered more cross-platform, but I'm a full stack web dev, network routing, all that kind of stuff is where I'm interested in.
Okay, fun. All right, well, let's get... Good.
Well, I was going to say, I would like to add, I have a beard as well, but if you're only listening, I'm showing there's no neck beard. just keeping that straight there.
Details matter.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's get into some stories, and we've got David up first, and you've got a spark of inspiration, eh?
So I came across an interesting story this past week. Is actually an introduction to a new distro I'd not heard of before. I don't know that I would jump into it at all, but it was interesting, and I found it interesting, so I wanted to share it. It's called Sparky Linux. I've got a link to an article from the Register on it, and one of the very interesting things about it is that it supports a large number of desktops. So if you're a desktop hopper, but you don't want to change your distribution, you can start with this. It's Debian based. So you can get most of the Debian distros straight from the Debian repositories. But on top of that, they have 5 what they call home roasted distros. And so those are ones that they've created specifically for themselves. Among those are Jade, Manakwari, if I'm pronouncing that right, probably not, Draco, and even CDE, the original cross Unix environment, which is quite interesting. And then they have 23 miscellaneous desktops available in their repositories, which I had not even heard of before. Everything I've heard a lot of them, but not all of them. So if you are interested in just trying desktops for the sake of trying desktops, that might be the distro for you.
Okay, that is a lot of fun. We talk sometimes about these boutique distros, and sometimes I have this question of like, what some of these, it's what's the point? Why does this one has a point? This one has a reason for existing. I like that a lot. We got to get Rob on this next time he feels the need to hop. You can just hop desktop environments instead of full distro.
Make it much easier.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So there's a bit of news from Pi World, and this one has people nervous. It has me a little bit nervous too. Raspberry Pi is exploring an IPO, an initial public offering. And so Raspberry Pi, the company, is looking at basically selling itself to the public on the UK markets. They've opted to go in the UK, not the US, because they are in English, they are a UK company. So that makes sense. But they're going public, essentially. And this could have ramifications for the Raspberry Pi. Eben Upton has promised that while he is there, pretty much nothing is going to change. And generally speaking, I believe him. I trust him on that. I think that's probably the case. There is always the question about what happens after he is ready to step down, but hopefully that's far enough in the future. We don't have to worry about it. And then one of the other things to keep in mind with this is you've got the Raspberry Pi Foundation and you've got Raspberry Pi, the company. And those are two distinct entities. And it's just the company that is going to go public. And I'm sure make a lot of the people that have been involved with that for a long time quite wealthy in the process. So, I mean, good for them. I just, I have hopes that Raspberry Pi is going to continue being awesome. And we're not going to see terrible problems come about as a result of going public. Have you guys seen this story? Do you have any thoughts on it?
I haven't seen it, but maybe you could explain to me, okay, Raspberry Company goes IPO and say they just suddenly turn the evil empire, well, just theoretically. Mm-hmm. What does the foundation control? I mean, are they doing like the layouts or, can they still put enough good in there? It wouldn't, if the company goes south, they can
I think
save everything.
I think the Raspberry Pi Foundation is like the educational part. That is the group that takes the Raspberry Pi boards into schools and places and teach people how to use them. So you could, if you were to think about like the extreme example, well, does the Raspberry Pi Foundation spin up another company to make Raspberry? So we saw this basically happen with Arduino, right? Back years ago, there were two separate Arduino companies, and they were in some cases making competing boards. I guess you could possibly see that with the Raspberry Pi. I don't think that's a very likely scenario, but it's possible. David, any thoughts?
I was just going to say, there are so many Pi alternatives out there now that I don't think somebody going purely profit driven and off the rails, so to speak, is really an option, because there's a whole ecosystem around it at this point.
Yeah. And if Raspberry Pi, if the people behind it lose their minds and start making terrible decisions, well, there's the Banana Pi, and there's I forget all the Pine. There's the Pine devices. There's the RISC-V, okay. The Star 5s. I mean, that's got your same 40-pin header on it you can plug Pi things into. So I'm not too worried, because they're going to continue to compete, and that's really what keeps companies honest, is they've got to compete for people's dollars. So that part's not going to change. I'm not terribly worried about it.
So the other fruit Pis are different companies, not just Raspberry.
Yes,
okay.
It is. That is essentially people that have come along and said, how hard could it be to take a system on a chip and slap it onto a system on a computer? with varying degrees of success, because one of the things that really makes Raspberry Pi so neat is that they've got really, really good software support. And you can take an original Raspberry Pi 1 and put the same Debian image on it as you put on your Raspberry Pi 5. Now you got to get the 32-bit version of it to be able to use the same one on both places. But you can do that, and that's still an option. And so there's some really some good software development practice and support that really is what made them stand out.
Okay. Well, I guess for the record, I'm not a big fan of the IPO just because I sometimes see companies start focusing less on their business and more on the stock price. And personally, I'm kind of maybe a little out in left field where I think don't worry about the stock price. As long as you run a really good company, the stock price will follow along and do good as well. But yeah, and I don't know that that's necessarily a completely foreign concept to companies that are public. You don't hear about them so much because they just kind of quietly go along and do what they're supposed to do. Whereas it's the companies that are chasing their stock prices. Those are the ones that you hear about because they're the ones that make the news because their stock prices are going up and down and all around. So they're laying off to gain stock price and all sorts of goofy things. And
yeah, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. All right. Well, let's talk about one of those big publicly traded companies that we all know and some of us love. Intel. What has Intel done for us recently, Jeff?
Well, they're helping us out here. So for the last few generations, Intel's been using a hybrid CPU architecture. Now this means there's a mix of P performance and E efficiency cores in each CPU. And if you're a new listener to the podcast, we've talked about this in the past. And the big trick to getting the most out of those CPUs, the hybrid CPUs, is making sure the correct task is put on the correct core. You don't want something that needs power to wind up on an E core and vice versa. There have been a lot of updates we've talked about in the past couple of years about getting the scheduler tune so it knows where to put each task. Well, this story is a continuation on that, where Intel has posted a couple of patches to their thread director. Now, while a lot of loads have been getting pretty well tuned, this set of patches addresses virtualization. So getting more out of your virtual machine and containers that virtualize. Specifically, they're looking at making virtual machines running Windows and using their virtual machines for games. That's kind of their target case here. When testing the patches, there was a 14% improvement in 3D Mark benchmark running onto Windows virtual machine. So you have a Linux machine running Windows virtually, running 3D Mark. That's where we got the 14%. Intel explained that the purpose of this patch is to enable the Intel thread director to communicate with the guest, the virtual machine, so the guest can better schedule which core the tasks go on. So they also said that thread director virtualization is not bound to virtual machine, hybrid technology or vCPUs or CPU affinity, meaning if you don't have a hybrid CPU, you can still use the same thread director without causing issues, but you're going to see the improvements best when running on a Windows 11 virtual machine and a hybrid CPU. So it won't hurt you if you don't have that. It's just not going to help you either. So that's a specific combination. They were seeing the 14% improvement. There are more patches coming, which are thermal related. So this isn't turned on yet, and it currently isn't in the main line for the kernel yet either. There is hope that in the next pull for the kernel or the one after that, these patches can be mainlined. So if you're currently running a virtual machine to run Windows games, there's some speed up coming in the future, and we'll keep everyone updated as this set of patches continues to be deployed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of wish that there was a solution that would work for both the Intel chips and the AMD chips, because some of them now have this same concept of lighter cores mixed in there. We'll see. We'll see if there's ever a. And I guess you would have to do it with making your scheduler more aware of them and their capabilities. So
Correct.
maybe somebody will come along and say, instead of making this the Intel thread director, why don't we just call it the thread director and bolt everything onto it? That seems to be a very, very kernel way to go about something.
Well, it is open source, so it's not like AMD couldn't go, hey, here's how Intel's doing it. Let's just make our hardware structure follow these same kind of general rules so that it would work. Because Intel has put a lot into this. We've covered this quite a bit last year, or earlier part of the year, late 2022, when these were a lot earlier, and there was some hiccups getting the loads right across the cores, but now they've really got it running pretty smooth, and I wouldn't have any hesitation, because I originally said I would hold off on the hybrid CPUs. I would have no hesitation now to jump on there for Linux. They're in great shape.
Yeah. So one of the, I don't know how much we've talked about this before. One of the things to keep in mind, when we talk about these technologies, a lot of times we're talking about them as desktop users. And there's sort of sometimes this thought that, well, this big company, Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, they don't care about Linux on the desktop. And sometimes that's true. But what they do care a lot about is Linux in the data center, because these big data centers, they're like 90% Linux machines in them, right? If not more than that for some of them. And so there are use cases where they care a lot and they really want to make it work. And maybe the desktop is not always that one, although we tend to get kind of that trickle down benefit that once Intel makes all this work in the data center, it'll start working on the desktop for free. And so that's pretty cool. That's neat to see.
Well, and especially if you think right now, Intel doesn't really have any workstation CPUs. Your regular desktop CPUs are kind of filling in for the workstation. They haven't made an extreme CPU for a while now. So you just have either your desktop or you have your Xenon, which is your enterprise CPU. So I think they also realize a lot of their desktop CPUs are kind of filling that middle workstation niche, that professional niche. And, it's one less design they have to carry. And if the software helps speed everything up, that's just a win for them.
Sure. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense.
And is there something to say about the future of Windows if they're really dumping a lot of resources and making these virtual machines run better? Is Windows going to become a container someday for Linux?
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. All right. Well, let's talk about something else. That runs both Windows and Linux. The Framework 16. And David's got a story about this, and I think David, like all of us, has been looking at those Framework laptops and going, man, that looks really nice. That looks like a lot of fun. Do I need to get one of those?
Well, I can't quite justify pulling the trigger on it yet, but it is interesting. The part that I wanted to bring out, though, I actually linked to two separate reviews, one from Phoronix and the other from Ars Technica. And the thing that I thought was quite interesting about it is we normally view everything from our open source Linux perspective. And the wonderful thing about the Framework 16 laptop is it is built Linux first. It's AMD. We've talked many times. Well, I haven't had the pleasure yet, but you guys have talked many times about AMD's better driver support, especially around graphics. But Ars Technica approaches it more from just a standard user's perspective. And they actually point out the AMD graphics driver as a negative. And I really felt like that was because they're not viewing it as a Linux user, but as just a general user. And so it just kind of highlights the continued frustration of the Linux desktop user experience, which I have firsthand because due to budgetary constraints, my laptops are AMD processors with NVIDIA GPUs. Yeah. And I'm always wrestling with that myself. So as far as a machine, the Frameworks Laptop 16 is a dream machine. It's powerful. It's got the Ryzen 7 or Ryzen 9 7940 HS or 7840 HS processors. It's got plenty of memory. It's got ports that can be swapped out, which if you looked at the laptop 13, the swappable ports and that functionality built in where they actually use a USB-C connector on the inside that lets you swap ports in and out is pretty interesting. One of the points that Ars Technica made, again, kind of from that general user perspective, is on a large laptop where you don't really have the need to switch because you have a lot more physical real estate to put ports. Those swappable ports kind of lose their appeal, and it actually may become more of a headache than something that's beneficial. But I still think it's a great laptop. I think the whole framework concept as standard, the upgradable nature and everything, I think it's a great product, and I'm excited to see them continue to develop around that.
Yeah. I'm just looking at my laptop. I've got the HP Dev 1 and all of the things plugged into it to be able to do this show. So I've got, 2 USB on one side for audio and video, and my headphones plugged in on that one side. And then on the other side, I've got 2 USB-C and an HDMI and power. And like every single port on this thing is full. So I like the idea of having 6 or 8, however many ports it has on it, and being able to swap them out between different devices. Man, that would be nice. I want one.
Yeah, I don't see how flexibility in any stretch of the imagination is a downside. I mean, how is it? Oh, you can change these out. Well, that's a bad thing. No, that's because you might have especially if you have these special cases where, hey, I need an audio jack, or I need a whole bunch of USB-C instead of A, or I only need A and not C, and all the other different connectors. It's like, no, that's really good. Now, I didn't read both of these articles, but I know Linus Tech Tips did a review of it as well, and he had his staff review it, and he didn't because he's an investor. Now, one thing they did mention was they thought the keyboard was really flimsy, and a lot of people didn't like the keyboard. But supposedly there's a fix coming for that, and they wound up putting some thermal pads underneath to add a little stability. Yeah, I saw that. And it helped. So did either article mention that, or
I did not see that mentioned.
Okay.
The Ars Technica,
and maybe it's. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say the Ars Technica did comment that the keyboard seemed pretty typical for a laptop.
Well, and maybe it's something. And they were maybe LTT is more of a keyboard snob, and they.
I would say so. Yeah.
they were a little picky than the average person that just kind of okay, whatever. I push the key and it makes a letter, and I'm happy,
Yeah.
But I've been looking at this too. One of these days I've been saying System 76 or the framework, and I'm kind of waiting to see how this all shakes out.
I do not go with a smaller screen size than 17 inches. So they're getting there. But when they come out with the next size up, then I'll be seriously looking at them.
Bigger than a 16. Does anybody make bigger than a 16-inch laptop anymore?
Well, I have 2 sitting in front of me right now. They're both Asus Toughbooks.
I would do 16. I'm okay with that. But not smaller. Like the 13 was not on my radar, but once they announced the 16, I've been kind of watching that.
Yeah, so my history there is interesting. My first laptop was one of the old Dell Inspirons, the massive thing. And then the laptop after that was an Asus EPC, the little tiny white ones. And I always thought, because I'm a big guy, I'm 6'5", and I always thought it must be humorous for somebody to walk in and I'm sitting in Starbucks, hunched over my little tiny laptop sitting in the bench. So I can go both ways. Goodness. All right, let's move along. And yes, OBS Studio. There is a beta of OBS Studio 30.1, and it's got at least one neat feature for us. And then there's something I'm a little confused about. And I have asked for some clarification on this, and I don't know if clarification has come yet. Actually, let me see if I can check real quick while I'm talking about this. But OBS 30.1, the big thing for us is Pipewire, and it has Pipewire input support, which in the past, OBS has supported Pulse Audio input. Because of the way Pipewire works, Pulse Audio if you have Pulse Audio support, you also have Pipewire support, right? Just because of the way those two things, Pipewire implements the Pulse Audio API. And Wim Taymans, the Pipewire guy, actually made a comment that he's pretty sure that it has been upstreamed. This Pipewire virtual camera stuff has been upstreamed in OBS. But as I look through the OBS change log, all I see that they've added is video capture device Pipewire source type, which essentially means to me that OBS can do Pipewire input, but not necessarily Pipewire output, which, it means we're going to have to wait just a little bit longer to get this magical moment when we can throw away the V4L2 loopback device, because it's not in the kernel and it's a pain and all of that. But we've taken a step in the right direction with OBS grabbing this. And then there was something else pretty interesting in there. Oh yes, AV1 support. OBS 30.1 now has AV1 support, including for the WebRTC whip output, which I didn't know what whip was until I talked with Sean DuBois over on Floss Weekly and figured out what it was. And I'm now pretty excited about it because you can do video input and output to something like Video Ninja without having to run a little encapsulated browser to actually get the input and output working. So some neat stuff there. So anyway, OBS 30.1 is cool. There's some fun things in there. And then it looks to me like, 31 or 32 is where the really, really exciting stuff is going to land.
I'm excited. I like OBS.
Yeah, it's great.
And I think we've told people before that's what. Well, I think everybody on here uses OBS.
To some
Are you using it, David?
I'm not running it right now, but I use it weekly.
Okay, so
yeah,
we're all fans of OBS. I know Rob uses it, and I think Ken does as well.
I think he might. If he doesn't, it's probably only because his computer's not up to it. He hasn't pulled the trigger yet on buying something modern. It's hilarious. Ken will describe his setup to us. And it's like, I've got this 5-year-old Chromebook over here and this 13-year-old desktop over here.
He's typing in the Discord now.
Ken McDonald is typing now.
It's like, how did you connect to the abacus in there too? I don't know, but he makes it work. I'll give him props for that.
Yes, that's fun stuff. All right, let's talk. VS Code, Jeff. VS Code. I like VS Code. I have started using VS Code for at least one project, and I'm now trying to figure out how I can get some of my other projects to work in VS Code because it's actually pretty neat. But apparently they've made everybody mad.
Yeah, and this might affect you depending on what kind of server you're running. So VS Code, basically we're talking about Microsoft Visual Studio 1.86. The January 2024 update has a big change in it, which causes some grief for some people. 1.86's text editor requires glibc greater than 2.28. And the problem in Ubuntu 18.04 is it uses glibc 2.27. So bottom line is the new update will not work with Ubuntu 18.04. I mean, this is a breaking update. So some of our audience is probably thinking, well, 18.04 is going into life this April, that just means a few months before you'd have to upgrade anyway. What's the big deal? Well, that isn't entirely true. While 18.04 is going end of life this April, it doesn't apply to people who signed up for the Ubuntu ESM or Extended Security Maintenance Program. Now, we've talked about this in past shows, and it gives you 5 more years of support for the LTS versions and is free if you have 5 machines or less. So the home user can take advantage of it. Well, circling back, that means 18.04 is still going to have 5 more years of security updates. We're looking at 2028 before it finally totally loses support. Well, there's 2 options that you can do if you find yourself in this situation. The first is not upgrade to 1.86, but instead stay on 1.85, or downgrade it if you got the update and didn't know it was going to break things. The second is also obvious. You need to upgrade to 20.04 or soon, 22 or the soon to be released 24.04. So why is this a problem? Basically because, not only are they losing support, but developers were caught off guard. The opinion is this wasn't handled well at all. There was a lot of people who were just doing normal upgrades and their Visual Studio broke. The upgrade was pushed out as part of the normal updates that, you didn't specifically request it. It's just part of the, update everything. Yes. You hit yes and it all updates, and
you mean
it's not good.
You mean Microsoft dropped the ball on an update somewhere? What?
I know, right? They really are infecting Linux, So, yeah, developers are not happy. And in the words of one developer, an update like this, which is, quote, major, in my humble opinion, should have had a security mechanism involved. It should have checked the libc version and refused the update. Now there are many people who are screwed in the middle of their work, and there's a lot of room for improvement here. So, typical Microsoft upgrade. There are a couple links in the article in the show notes on how to downgrade to 1.8.5, and there's a reminder to stop updates for this program so you don't get this happening every time you try and apply the security patches. So take a look at the article, and, forewarned is forearmed, but it's probably too late for a lot of people.
So I must admit, I have a question. Should you really be running VS Code on your servers? This is sort of a test it in production kind of thing, if you ask me. And I understand that what a lot of people are doing is they've got VS Code running on their local machine and they're using the SSH plugin to be able to get into a remote server. I do that too. I understand it. But why are we doing development on the server? Do development on your local machine or a test server and then actually deploy it to your old ancient Ubuntu server. I'm maybe I should be more compassionate for these guys, but I'm having trouble working it up.
I think they're doing development on an 1804 machine for some of the old servers.
I suppose. David?
I was going to say I had the same question, and that perspective is what I was hoping was the case, is that they had a development environment exactly duplicating their production environment.
I guess.
Well, that's not always true.
Oh, I know. But I'm just giving the benefit of the doubt here.
I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production.
The most entertainment is when you suspend disbelief. You just. All
right, so let's talk about Asterisk and SIP. David, I am kind of surprised we've not done a whole lot of Asterisk work here on the show, but I've been a fan of Asterisk for a long time too. One of the fun memories that I have is I get dispatched out to a hotel on the Army base close to me. And, of course, it's Army, so they've got all kinds of money that they can throw at this stuff. And they had these couple little pre-made server boxes that, let's see, what was it doing? It was taking SIP on one end and turning it over to POTS and then maybe going back to SIP. I don't remember. It was something weird. And they had this little machine. It was called a brain box. And I was there. I was the smart hands on site. We went to, do the install, and they're like, oh, we can't get into this one. And They had me plug a monitor into it and reboot it, tell them what I saw. And they're like, we can't get into it. I'm like, well, do you want me to log into it for you? And like, oh, well, you don't have the password. We can't give it to you. I'm like, I bet I could get into it. And of course, just interrupted boot. And this was in the days when, things were not as secure as they are now. So you could put in run level 1 and it would let you in, no problem. I got into it and we figured out what was going on. And the guy's like, we can't believe you figured out how to do that on our Asterisk boxes. I've been playing with Asterisk for a long time. So what is new, sir?
Nothing too earth-shattering. It's all point releases. I just mainly wanted to bring it in because I love Asterisk too, and I've noticed there has been a dearth of Asterisk discussion or SIP in general. So Asterisk bumped all of their releases one minor version. 21 went to 21.1.0, 20 went to 0.6.0, and 18 went to 21.0. Why are there three different branches? That's because they have the mainline branch, 21, where they're pushing all their new functionality and features. So if you want to be cutting edge and having lots of communication fun, that's the one you should check out. But for everybody else that needs that solid reliability for those military installations, you're going to be looking at either 18 or 20, which are the two LTS branches. The releases that got bumped right now, they pushed out 26 bug fixes, 16 improvements, and 4 new features in each of the LTS branches. I didn't pull any of them out because there wasn't anything real earth-shattering that I saw. It's just the normal kind of core functionality. And then in 21, they had one additional branch-specific bug fix in that. Relatedly, another project that you often that runs in the same circles is the SIP router, Camilio. I'm probably mispronouncing that. Camilio, which I really like the word because it's a Hawaiian word meaning or to talk or to converse. And I practiced it 29 times before it and I still screwed it up, but that's normal. But it was chosen for its special flavor. Now, I've worked with both of these projects in the past, as mentioned briefly at the beginning of the show. Asterisk is kind of a toolbox for SIP communication, or a Swiss Army knife, if you will. You can do almost anything with it. It underlies a lot of PBX or personal branch exchange software that you can get now. You can buy commercial ones. There are many different open source ones, but Asterisk itself is just like most Linux projects, all text file based. So you can install it and get something where you can call between a couple of soft phones pretty quickly. And it's really fun to be able to just play around with it. Camilio is a SIP router, which SIP is Session Initiation Protocol, and it is the protocol that sets up the calls. And so the reason why you may want two different software solutions is on the SIP routing side. That is where you're going to see more of your external security issues. If you're open to the internet, you're going to get your attack surface is going to be on the SIP side, where you've got fraudulent activity attempting to initiate calls. And then on the other side of it, you often have a case where you need to route SIP, where you don't actually need to route the actual audio traffic that's associated with it. So SIP is setting up your call paths. So I mentioned I work for an international telecom. What we would do for a lot of our calls is we actually never transferred the high bandwidth audio traffic. We were worried about adjusting rate tables, not to get off into the weeds. So we would bring SIP in, route that through certain places, and then as part of that process say endpoint A, here's endpoint B, and so the actual audio traffic would never go through our servers. So that project did a small rev from 5.7.3 to 5.7.4, which was just some minor code fixes and documentation updates. But both of those are interesting projects, and if you are interested in doing any sort of communication, they have great. Well, first, they have grown so much over the last decade or two that there's a lot of overlap. You can do almost anything you need with either one now. The separation and the distinction just isn't as significant as it used to be.
Yeah. So I know the story behind Asterisk is pretty fun. If I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure this is the right one. They initially wanted to do, I think it was desktop support, Linux desktop support. Like they built this business around this idea. It's like, well, they needed a phone system. Well, surely it couldn't be too hard to build our own. And so they started Asterisk to have a phone system to be able to run their business to do Linux desktop support. And the phone system part of it turned out to be more interesting and made money for them as opposed to actual desktop support. And then I think is it Sangoma that has purchased them and runs it now?
Yes. And I actually suggested to you, and I'm putting it out there in public now, that we try to bring somebody into Floss Weekly from Sangoma, because the community involvement has definitely changed some with that transition.
Sure.
And I don't know all the details there, but it would be interesting. But yeah, I got to actually meet Mark Spencer back. It's been a minute, but he's a very interesting, very cool guy. And Digium, which was the company he founded around Asterisk, was an awesome and very active open source community.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when it was that we talked with them. It's been a while. Yeah, we'll have to have them back. It'd be a lot of fun. Asterisk is a lot of fun. See, one of the neat things that you can do with Asterisk, of course, because you control all of that traffic. You know, you can run it on a laptop if you want to, and then get a desktop SIP phone and connect to it. Or you can run a SIP client on a computer, or you can run a SIP client on a cell phone. And once you kind of understand the way those different building blocks work together, there's some crazy fun things you can do. I have a lot of weird stories about sitting on my little computer in Starbucks, but was doing a test like that, and I ended up sitting in Starbucks with my little tiny white Asus E computer, and then a desktop SIP phone sitting behind it, plugged into the computer, and of course VPN magic and everything making this work, making a SIP call off of it, just to see if we could at the time. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I have a lot of fond memories of Asterisk and making things work with it.
I'm glad you guys explained it, because I had never heard of this before. Neither program.
I imagine that your calls somewhere along the line, though, go through Asterisk. At least some of them do, I would think.
As an aside, there is a lady named Allison who is a voice talent for the phone system. And she open sourced all of her voice files with Asterisk. But the interesting thing about Allison is once you listen to her, if you're involved in the project, you'll start recognizing her voice when you call into different places all over the place.
Yes. That's always fun. All right. Okay, let's go from audio to video. Not that Asterisk doesn't do video, because you totally can. But talking about something specific here, and the story here is that Vulkan Video added AV1. And I think we kind of need to take a step back and talk about first what Vulkan Video is, and then why AV1 is cool. And then we'll cover why it's neat that we have those two things together. So Vulkan, of course, is the new hot open source video card API, right? It's like it supports, or it replaces DirectX and OpenGL. It's actually made by the Cronus Group, which are the same people that made OpenGL. And it's a little bit lower level than OpenGL is. And a lot of companies, a lot of game engines have moved to started using Vulkan. Well, one of the things that they looked at with that was somebody, I don't know who it was, but somebody said, man, wouldn't it be cool if this rendering engine API that we use for the video cards just kind of automatically, as a part of it, handled video encoding and decoding? And apparently their boss said, yeah, that would be cool. Let's make it happen. So you've now got something called Vulkan Video, which is it's just part of Vulkan. It's not anything. So we've got video encoding and decoding in Linux, but you've got one that's by NVIDIA, and you've got like two different ones that are under AMD, and there's names like VA API, and it's been a mess for a long time. It's been a pain to work with. And so with Vulkan, there's one API, it's baked into the API, your video card already supports it. Here, Vulkan Video, you should be able to just encode and decode with it. And as soon as, the maturity comes and all the projects support it, video encode and decode should theoretically just be a solved problem. All right, so one of the problems with video encode and decode is software patents. So, you've got all these guys like the MPEG licensing authority or whatever their actual name is. They're trade groups. Well, they hold patents, software patents on different parts of video codecs and audio codecs. And that's one of the reasons why, say, H.265 is so difficult to use on Linux, because to be able to do H.265, you've got to pay, I think it is MPEG LA, a licensing fee for permission to use their patents. I'm not a fan of software patents. I'll just put it that way and we'll move on. There is a way to be able to use it, and that is basically because with H.265, your AMD and NVIDIA, they've already paid that as part of the GPU. And so if you can get that kind of plumbed in, then things start to work. It's a huge pain. So I think it's Google that came along and said, wouldn't it be nice if we had a very high performance video codec that wasn't patent encumbered? It didn't use any of these software patents. They put people to work on it, and the thing that they came up with is AV1, and it is a really cutting edge video codec. So basically, it takes your full resolution video and compresses them down to where you can actually work with it, stream it across the internet. It's not, your video files are not terabytes large like they are with truly uncompressed video. So they came up with AV1. It's fairly new, but seems to be a really pretty good codec and seems to be not patent encumbered. So the thing that just happened is Kronos Group, the people behind Vulkan, added a decode function into the Vulkan specification. Just released a rev on the spec, and it adds AV1 decode. Hopefully in a future spec, we will see AV1 encoding. And again, so that is getting your GPU to do this encode and decode for you. And then, on top of that, the hope is that you're going to see, well, we talked about with OBS last time, one of the things it added was AV1. So you hope that things like OBS is going to start supporting AV1. The browsers will add more support for it. More YouTube videos, let's say, will start getting encoded in AV1 and be available that way. So some fun stuff like that. But as we're moving more and more into this future where you have this support both in Vulkan and with AV1, like I said, hopefully it'll start becoming a solved problem to be able to do a hardware accelerated both video decoding, but also encoding. And if we can get to that point, then we'll sort of arrived when it comes to using multimedia on the desktop.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's kind of like last week we were talking about how some of the presentation is getting offloaded to the desktops. Why have a central place, like a OpenGL have to handle all sorts of standards when you already have it done in hardware and in the drivers, and then the actual, the displaying is made simple. Then, it just saves a lot of overhead.
Yeah, and it's been a pain. Like I've done video for the longest time, and I don't think I've ever successfully used hardware accelerated video encoding because it's just always been broken in one way or another.
Yeah, and just kind of a step back too for the people that don't know as much about Vulkan. The idea was like OpenGL, you'd say, make a box, mm-hmm. and OpenGL would make a box on the screen, where Vulkan, you're saying, okay, make a line here, make a line here, make a line here, make a line here to make your box. Well, it's harder to do that in Vulkan, but it's a lot faster because you have less overhead and you can just exactly get what you want.
Yeah.
So that's why everybody's going to Vulkan from OpenGL. Not to mention in the history of OpenGL, it was kind of held back a lot of years from some companies that were, we'll say, archaic and no longer around anymore, but they didn't want something to change, and the Kronos group said, okay, fine. And so there was some stagnation for a while, and
yes.
Vulkan is very good. We love Vulkan.
Yeah, it makes things work. It really does.
Yeah.
All right. Well, We'll talk about Clonezilla.
Yeah. Clonezilla Live 3.1.2 has been released with kernel 6.6 and memtest 86 plus 7.0. So before we go into the details of, what is Clonezilla? So Clonezilla is a partition and disk imaging cloning program. And we are talking about Clonezilla Live here, which is for single machine backup and restore. There's also Clonezilla SE and Clonezilla Lite server. So that's for if you're using a massive deployment such as enterprise and stuff like that. But we're just going to stick to the more single user environment today, the live version. Mm-hmm. So they've updated the 3.1.2 release to the 6.6 kernel since the 6.5 kernel reached end of life back in November. And for those really into details, it's the 6.6.11 kernel to be specific. The kernel's not the only thing to get updated. The rest of the OS was also updated. The ISO is based on the Debian SID repository, and this release grabbed the state of the repository on January 16th, 2024. Now, they also added a new way to load Unifont to address the issues that were encountered when loading fonts. There was an issue where the Grub security policy would block font loading. So basically the solution came from Debian and how they handled the issue. So font loading should not be a problem anymore. This version also ships with a new ESO 208, which is a tool for rapid server disk image cloning and deployment within local area networks based on the BitTorrent protocol. There's also a simple output for the ESO Lecher script, and that's so that you can have a simple output mode when your terminal is smaller than 80 by 24. There is a fix to get the correct testing file name when using the OCS prep cache script. Before it would give you an incorrect file that was actually under test. So now you will have the correct one. Now, as the title of the article in the show notes says, Mem86 Plus was upgraded to 7.0. Now, just so everyone is clear, Mem86 is a commercial program, though it does have a free version, which is limited. Memtest 86 Plus, so it's got 86 and then the plus symbol, is the open source one that we know and love. If anyone doesn't know, it basically does what the program name is. It tests memory. Version 7.0 has gained the ability to question the Intel integrated memory controller to find live memory timing information, as well as some initial support for getting error correction code info on some models of AMD Ryzen CPUs. Now, keep in mind that the support for the ECC information, that's the error correcting information, it's not supported on all platforms. So just heads up there. It did add support for MMIO and UART, and MMIO is memory mapped input output, and UART is universal asynchronous receiver transmitter, which is a protocol for asynchronous serial communication in which the data format and transmission speeds are configurable. Now, what this means is, we've talked in the past how memory pools, more and more we're getting into where machines, mostly servers and enterprise, there's new memory protocols and there's new ways to share large pools of memory between the different machines. So that's where this will come in and can help communicate and test those different, pools, the shared pools of memory between machines. Finally, version 7 brings many debugging options, bug fixes, and optimizations. So it's a much improved program. So if you use Clonezilla, go out and get the latest version to pick up all the goodness. And if you don't, you might need to go out and take a look and see if this is one of the tools that you should keep in your toolbox for kind of the, rainy days when things don't go so well, or in preparation of when things might not go so well. So look at the link in the show notes and give her a shot.
I remember using Clonezilla. We would use it quite a bit when we were going to give somebody a Linux install, a Windows user. We finally talked him into trying Linux. It's like, okay, now let's use Clonezilla and back up your Windows install. So if something goes terribly wrong, we can get it back for you. I've
get out of jail free card.
Yeah, I've got to admit though, I've gone away from using Clonezilla quite a bit. I just Fedora Live CD, and then DD Rescue is my tool of choice there. Too many times, like Clonezilla or even just straight DD will die on trying to copy something over because you run into some kind of disk problem. Whereas DD Rescue, it'll hop to the next sector and keep on going, and then when it gets to the end, it'll go back and it'll you can tell it, I want you to try that one sector 500 times. It'll sit there and try it, and sometimes it'll get a good read out of it.
And I've had great success with Mem86 Plus.
Oh, that's true.
There's been many times it's like there's a ghost in the machine, and it's like I thought it was a drive, I thought it was a CPU, I thought you run it, and then it was like, nope, I lost a stick of memory.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I a couple of times now I've had machines that one particular program will segfault when you go to run it. It's like, I don't know what's going on. Oh, I should test the memory. And both times it's what it was. It's one of the later sticks of memory. So nothing used it until you started running this more memory intensive program, and then it would hit it. And yeah, goes to the machine for sure.
I ran into something like that. It was getting disk errors. Right. It was corrupting the disk. Same kind of thing. You'd run it light, not a problem. You get enough loaded in there, you hit the bad stick, and it would try to save data to the drive, and it corrupted.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right.
Ghosts in the machine are always memory errors.
Yeah. Either memory errors or DNS. I've also been told it's always DNS. All right.
My memory errors were the other guy's memory, so just saying.
Indeed. All right. Well, hey, let's chat about another thing that's one of our favorites, KDE and Fedora. David's got this story, and then I've got a plus one to go on the end of it. But we'll let David take it away.
All right. So, if you have a special interest in KDE and Fedora, the KDE SIG, which is Special Interest Group, is wrapping up a test week this week for Plasma 6. And I just think I wanted to bring this in because I use KDE, I use Fedora, and I think it's really interesting to watch it. I didn't learn about this early enough to join this test week, but I really like that Special Interest Group, and I like to follow it. And as a tie-in to Floss, Neil Gampa, if I'm saying his last name correctly, was on Floss Weekly 762, and he pointed out something that I didn't realize, that KDE is a full-fledged member, or as I think he put it, as a first-class citizen of the Fedora ecosystem and can block releases. So this test week that they're having right now is very important. And with that being said, I think Jonathan has some behind-the-scenes stuff he wants to talk about.
Well, I have a question for you, David. Do you run when you run Fedora and KDE? Do you run it with X11 or do you run it with Wayland?
Well, I was running it with X11 until last week when I installed the beta driver that was mentioned. It crashed X11, and now I'm running in Wayland because it reverted to the AMD. Because remember, I mentioned that my laptops are all AMD cores with integrated graphics plus the NVIDIA discrete graphics. So Wayland doesn't use the NVIDIA driver and allows me to continue functioning until I get around to troubleshooting the problem.
All right. So one of the things that was a big deal with Fedora 40 is the KDE Special Interest Group, basically the people that keep KDE up to date on Fedora, said we're going to not just deprecate, but entirely remove the option to run X11 with KDE. Now, there's some other desktops where you can still run X11. They're not removing it entirely from the distro, but they're removing the option to do it with KDE. And I like this move. I think this is an important move for actually the future of Wayland and KDE. There's always been just that little bit, the last 1%. Like, we've hit the point of Wayland being ready for prime time, like 98 or 99% of the way. And I'm kind of the opinion that to get that last 1%, you just need everybody to move over there. All your developers, all your users, let them move over there. They'll find the rest of the bugs and we'll finally get them fixed. Well, so the way it works in Fedora is the Special Interest Group, they'll put a change request in. And basically it's their plan of what they're going to do for the next version of Fedora. And then a group in Fedora called FESCO, which that's the something engineering and Fedora Engineering and Steering Committee, will look at it and vote on it. So the KDE SIG put in this change proposal, and they said, we're going to go to KDE 6. And when we go to KDE 6, we're going to go Wayland only. FESCO voted on it. It's been a couple of months ago now. FESCO voted on it, said, that's fine, you do it. Nobody really complained too much. Well, about a week ago, somebody came along and said, hey, I'm going to add this package to Fedora that re-adds KDE. Let's see, what I forget what the package is called, but essentially it's the X11 backend for KDE. And out of the blue, after all of the change, we're past the freeze time for changes. And he came along and said, here's what we're going to do. And the steering committee is like, how do we handle this? Because this guy is one of the committers. Like, he's a packager for Fedora. And so they were like, nothing about the package actually breaks our guidelines. We've never told somebody that they can't put a package in like this. But at the same time, it breaks the change proposal, and it's going to undo the thing that we already told everybody we're doing. And so there's kind of this internal fight right now inside of Fedora. And I've got a link here in the show notes off to the actual mailing list about it. And I have been told that even though this is the -dev mailing list, even for regular users, if you have strong feelings about this, feel free to write in, be nice, don't call people names, maybe have a friend read over your email. This is what I did. I literally let somebody read over this. I'm like, make sure I'm not putting my foot in my mouth. And he came back and like, you need to be a little nicer about this. Okay, fine. But let him know if X11 is important to you. If Wayland actually breaks something, that's fine, I guess. Let them know. Or if you're like me and you think that it's time for X11 to get kicked to the curb, let them know that too. I think it would be neat for folks from the show to write in and let the Fedora guys know what they think about it. But we will see. We will see if Fedora 40 actually comes with KDE on X11 or not. We will see.
I'm kind of surprised about this, just from I'm surprised they're even debating putting X11 in, because Fedora, for example, they're the ones that first jumped on Pipewire.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing they do is they go, you know what? We're going to commit and we're doing it. So to kind of bobble a little bit at this surprises me. Yeah. I totally expected them to say, yep, Wayland all the way and pedal to the floor.
Yeah, it's just weird, though, because of the way it's being done, because you have another packager that's outside of the KDE special interest group that goes, I'm going to put the packages back in. It's like, what do you mean you're going to put the packages back in? You're not a KDE guy. But because of the way everything works, it's kind of, you can do that, I guess. It's weird. The way it's sitting now is FESCO has made what they call a special injunction, and that they're blocking the package for now, but they're trying to figure out what they're going to do about it. And that 9-person panel is somewhat split on what they should do.
I guess I'll have to write in and go Wayland all the way.
Sure. Well, speaking of Wayland, there is a bit of a Wayland watch that we will do quickly. And that is a couple of proposals in part inside Wayland itself. And we talk about Wayland a lot. One of the things to keep in mind, Wayland is more of a specification. Whereas with X11, you have the X11 display server. Well, there's not really a Wayland display server. Wayland is a specification, and then KDE implements that specification, and GNOME implements that specification. So it's just a little different. So we've got a couple of these proposals where people have written in their merge requests to add things to this specification. The first one did get merged, and it's a pretty neat one. It's called the XDG top-level drag protocol. And this is essentially the ability to grab a piece of an application and drag it off, and it becomes its own window. And probably the place where people see this the most is like in Google Chrome or Chromium, where you can drag a tab off and it'll become its own window. Come to find out, that's kind of broken if you actually force Chrome to run in Wayland mode, and which I am doing, and that is the thing that crashes Chrome for me the most often, is dragging tabs around because it doesn't like it. So that proposal sent into Wayland, enough people signed off on it. It's going to happen. It's now part of Wayland. Chrome will start using it as soon as it becomes official and people support it. So yay, we have top-level drag protocol. The other one that is proposed is something that is surprising to me that it is so controversial, and that is XDG top-level icon. So on a lot of desktop environments, KDE does this. I think GNOME does not, but KDE for sure does this. At like the top left-hand corner of each application, there's the little tiny icon. It's almost like a favicon from the web. The icon that shows what it is. Well, those of us that have been running Wayland for a while, we're used to this idea of that icon just being the generic Wayland W, because it's been broken for a while. The official way for an application to set that icon is with a .desktop file, and that is essentially the shortcut that defines what an application is. Well, there are some places and some times where that doesn't make sense, like running something from within a sandbox that gets its own window. Well, if it's sandbox, you really, really don't want it writing a .desktop file to your system somewhere. So Matthias Klump put together this specification, added in as a change request to just have a simple way. Here, let an application make this, this little tiny buffer. It populates its icon in this buffer in memory and then publishes it, and then anything else on the system that wants to can access it. That way your desktop environment can set the nice little icon wherever it wants to, whether it's in Task Switcher or on the, in the top left-hand corner, wherever it wants to put it, it's there. And the drama over this, oh my goodness. There are 164 comments here. And there are a couple people in particular that are very against this proposal for reasons that I do not fully understand. One of them is a security concern. Now, this is a little mind-boggling to me. It's a security concern because one application could act like another, and if you don't have this icon set in .desktop, then an application could modify its own icon, and you wouldn't be able to know the difference. It's like, guys, if you have an application running code on your machine that's malicious, it's game over already. There's no security concern here. It's game over. If you're at this point, you're in trouble. Yeah, sometimes the way Wayland works, not Wayland the specification, but Wayland like the group of developers that do it behind the scenes, it drives me nuts. It really drives me crazy watching it. So that's what's going on these last couple of weeks in Wayland, and hopefully we will somehow eventually get a top-level icon that programs can set, because it's just ridiculous.
I've seen a couple of these where I've seen comments in forums and whatnot saying, I can't believe, all this time they don't have some of this and they haven't figured it out. I want to point out that, you cannot underestimate the complexity in this whole thing. It's not something that you can crank out very quickly. And there's so many special specifications and different APIs. I mean, you're doing multiple hardware, NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, integrated, not integrated, discrete. And then, of course, you have all the different desktops and monitor combinations, and it's very complex. So
I agree with you, and I disagree with you. So when we're talking about just the Wayland specification, which is when you're in the actual Wayland repository, it's just the specification. It's less about the technical complexity, and it's more about the organizational complexity. So you have shareholders essentially from all of those groups that get to speak into these decisions. And it's not a technical issue. It's a design by committee sort of issue. And you've got to kind of herd all of the cats to get people to agree that such and such is a good idea before you can go forwards with it. And I'm not entirely sure whether that means that we're going to get a very light and well-tuned and nothing extra in there and almost perfect Wayland specification, or if that means you're going to have your typical design by committee problems where nothing ever happens. It seems to be it's a toss-up between the two so far.
I've never had good luck with design by committee. And in my real life, when I come up with something, a lot of times we'll throw together a framework before we ever take it to the committee. So we just at least have a kind of a general direction and a basic groundwork to work with and optimize versus trying to start from scratch and have it, like you said, kind of go nowhere because everybody's pulling it.
Yeah, that's what happens sometimes with Wayland, particularly with these little niche ideas. Like some of the big stuff got decided a long time ago and it's not a problem. But the little niche, okay, only one desktop environment needs this, but because of what it is, it's got to be part of Wayland. Oh, the fight over that sometimes gets to be ridiculous. Oh, all right. So one last story, and this one is kind of the opposite of that, because rather than designed by committee, this is a program that gets designed by one particular company, and that is Thunderbird. Jeff, what is new in Mozilla Thunderbird land?
Yeah, and now it feels like I'm taking a story from Jonathan, but he didn't pick this one up, and I thought it was worth bringing up, and haven't got to it yet, but we're going to talk about Rust in a minute, so that's where Jonathan comes in. He's usually our Rust guy, but so there are a couple things going on here. So there's a new initiative with the idea of showing more transparency and engagement with the community. Thunderbird is launching a monthly digest, and the first one's out, and that's where our story today comes from, along with their roadmap items. So one of the big things the Thunderbird developers are working on in 2024, so this is part of their roadmap, it's overhauling the global message database. Currently, it's based on the MORC framework, which they say is outdated. The MORC database is holding back a lot of modern functionality, such as genuine threaded conversation views. And the project has a lot of focus, and they're hard at work making this change. And they're basically calling it very pivotal to Thunderbird, so they can get these new features going. So this is the, I had to make this the second part of my story just to keep Jonathan on the edge of his seat. But Rust and Exchange support are coming to Thunderbird. So the first is they're almost ready to introduce native support for Microsoft Exchange. And there's a lot of people who are excited for this. And how they're going to do that is with Rust. So Thunderbird is enabling Rust in general, not only just for the Exchange support. Now, right now, there isn't it isn't officially supported in Thunderbird yet, but they will once they get it stable and safe. Once that implementation is solid, then they'll release it for general use for everyone. But it's still in development, so it'll be a little bit before we see it. But they're hard at work on it. The Thunderbird people have said that because of the size and complexity of the Rust implementation, they're going to have dedicated posts and extensive recaps on what all is going on. The Rust details are beyond this initial digest. So whenever, I'm sure we'll cover that once they release that, we'll kind of maybe go under the hood a little more of what problems they're facing and what they're doing to implement Rust in Thunderbird. So Mozilla is hoping that the new features and support and this new clarity with the community will rejuvenate Thunderbird and attract new users. So if you take a look at the article linked in the show notes, and the article has a link to the official Thunderbird announcement in there, so you can see exactly what they said and see the first digest that they put out. So be on the lookout from these articles from Mozilla, and you can keep up with the latest, greatest innovations going on with Thunderbird.
Yeah, so Thunderbird kind of wasted on the vine for several years under Mozilla, and we actually got really close at one point to Thunderbird becoming part of LibreOffice of all things. So for one thing, I think it's neat that Mozilla is finally returning and putting some resources back into Thunderbird. That is fairly handy to see it come back in a big way.
Yeah, they're really kind of gung-ho with it.
Yeah. They figured out that maybe it would be a good idea to have a good mail client if the whole Firefox thing doesn't work out for them, I think.
Yeah.
I am ashamed, I guess, to say how excited I am that maybe Thunderbird will actually start working with Exchange. I have so many customers that, because I don't want to host their email, or they don't want to pay me to host their email, whichever way it goes, they're on something like GoDaddy. And well, that's an Exchange email server. And trying to make Thunderbird or one of the others work, something other than Microsoft Outlook, work with an Exchange server can be a pain. So if Thunderbird were to actually get really good Exchange support, I think that would make my life a lot easier.
Same.
Oh yeah, I mean, and for quite a while, my understanding was Microsoft was trying to go away from Outlook. I mean, not for enterprise, because enterprise it's too tied in, but
right
for personal, haven't they kind of stepped away a little bit?
I don't know. I was at somebody's computer just the other day that was using Windows Mail, and we got the pop-up, Windows Mail is now Outlook.
But if you want to know all about that, listen to Paul on Windows Weekly.
Oh, yeah.
But the bottom line is that they have two completely separate products, both named Outlook. And now that they've done that, I run into problems all the time with some of my corporate customers I support, where end users open the wrong Outlook.
Yeah,
and then don't know why they don't have email.
Okay, I didn't know that, and I'm only using the enterprise one, and they've, for the load that we get at work, they've locked out or removed the other one, so there's only one selection for Outlook.
I mean, if you include all of Office 365, they kind of have 3 different products called Outlook.
Yeah, the web version,
yeah,
the home version, and the enterprise version.
Yup. Goodness, what a mess.
Oh, side note, I hate the web versions of the Office suite. They're so GIMP, they drive me nuts. Now, this is me as working in the corporate environment where a lot of heavy duty use kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I
was going to say, how do they compare to Google Docs and Google Sheets?
Not even close. But there's a lot of scripting, a lot of automation and stuff. Like, for example, in Excel and Word, and tie in with SharePoint and other things. And so it's just the web versions don't cut it. And especially when you're running, 500 or 5,000, 10,000 columns by, a million rows, it just, the web just bogs down.
Your browser really should not have to do that.
Yeah. But like I said, I admit I'm on the extreme end of this on the corporate side.
Yeah. David?
That sounds like the point when you say Excel is not a database, though.
It's actually, financial spreadsheets. So it's actually not even a database. It's just the sheer number of transactions and size of transactions.
There's this saying in the financial world that if your accountant is using Excel spreadsheets, you have a big problem.
Oh, there was a meme that we had on the Discord a while back, though, that said, and I can't remember exactly how it went. It said something like, "Nice try, Billy, move name to good list for Santa," or something. And Santa was replying back, "I use several connected Excel sheets like all professionals do."
Yes. I remember that. Great stuff. All right. Well, that is our news. Let's get on to some command line tips quickly. Boy, we were prepped. We were prepped to just have 2 people here, and so we got 4 stories each, and we ended up going long, but that's all right. Command line tips. I've got one that was introduced to me this past week, and it's niche. It solves a very particular problem, but if this is the problem that you've got, it is great. And that problem is, if you've got something like a development board and you need to catch the really, really early boot output, but it uses something like USB serial to do it. Well, if you've done any of this, if you've done embedded development, I'm sure you've been here where, okay, this, when I plug it in, it's going to come up as /dev/ TTY ACM0, let's say. Okay, we're going to type this in ahead of time, and I'm going to hold one finger over the enter button, and I'm going to hold my tongue just right and try to plug this USB in at the same time. And the moment I plug the USB in, I'm going to hit enter so that I can get the first of the log lines. And inevitably, you miss a couple of lines, and inevitably, that's the lines that has the stuff you were looking for. So there's this program, TIO, T-I-O, and it is essentially just a terminal. It's like you can use it like Minicom. You can use it like your PuTTY over on Windows. It lets you open up a terminal, so you can tell it /dev/TTY ACM0. Well, you can also give it the other name, like in /sys/bus/whatever. You're going to have another name there. Well, you can give it that, and what it will do is it'll watch for that device to be created. And as soon as it's created, it'll open it up and show you what's happening, which is really useful because you can just start TO and then at your leisure, plug in your device, it'll show up and immediately start grabbing output from it. So if you've ever found yourself there, holding your tongue, trying to catch the first lines of output from something, TO, that is the one for you. All right.
Very neat.
It is. It's niche, but it's good. David, what do you have for us?
Well, I am going to go old school, and I'm going to mention GNU Screen.
Yes.
I checked, and it does not appear that we've ever touched on that before. And it is something that when you're dealing with remote Linux in enterprise scenarios, remoting into servers, it can save your butt. It saved mine many a time. What is really neat about it, so you can do TLDR or man screen. The reason why there are actually two commands. There's a screen, and then there's a whole newer alternative called tmux. I plan on talking about tmux in the future. Mm-hmm. But screen being the older solution for this functionality I'm going to talk about, you can find it on basically any version of Linux. It'll be supported. So even if you happen to be connecting to an older version of Linux somewhere, even if VS Code won't run on it, GNU Screen will. But the really cool thing about it is, like, if you SSH into a machine and you start running a command, a long running command, or something that's critical that, like you're editing a config file in production, not that I recommend that, and your SSH connection dies, internet craps out, your machine crashes, something, that command terminates and your server is going to be left in a unknown state. If you run screen first, mm-hmm. you will have another command prompt there. It'll look just like it did before you ran screen without configuration changes. But it creates a shell that you are connected to versus running through your connection. So then you can disconnect from it. So if you're running a long command and you don't want to get tied up, you can disconnect, leave it running, reconnect later, check on it. If you're doing stuff that is critical, you run it inside screen. And then if your connection dies, when you reconnect, screen will still be running and it'll be right where you left it and nothing will be broken. Yes. So it is very handy. It's much safer for anything that when you're working in those critical real world situations where you need to work on something that you don't want to get it left in an undetermined state. So I just wanted to point out screen for you.
Yeah. So two things. One, I have messed up several machines over my lifetime by doing something like installing updates on the command line over SSH and having the SSH connection break in the middle of installing updates. You would think that, DNF and apt and yum and all those programs would be programmed to handle that gracefully. Not always. Not always handles that gracefully. You end up with problems. And then one of the other things that's cool about Screen that I really like is that you can create additional virtual terminals inside of your Screen session, swap between them. And then you can even do things like break your screen into windows and have multiple terminals inside your Screen session. Two up here and one down here, and you can have BTOP running in one, your updates installing in another, and doing something else. yeah, the screen is really cool. I like it a lot. All right. And Jeff, I think you've got not exactly a command line tip. This looks pretty familiar though. What's your story, sir?
Well, this is something I actually ran into just this week. So I was logging into my server. Well, I happened to be logged in locally. And then I'm like, oh, I need to do something, but I didn't want to go over and grab the keyboard and mouse. I just thought, I'll remote desktop into it. And it comes up, and I get the login screen. I type in my password and black screen. And this is going to be pretty basic, but for the newer people out there, which certain ways I'm a newbie, I'm like, what the heck is why can't I get remote desktop to work? Well, come to find out, you can't have a local session logged in to a desktop and then remote desktop in. And, the simplest thing is, okay, log yourself out of the machine locally, and then you can remote desktop in and everything works great. Well, this link I have in the show notes, and I'm not going to go over every step in here, but tells you how you can actually work around this, and you can have multiple logins through your XRDP and work around one. And they're all the commands are listed, so you can copy and paste, and it explains every step. But like workaround one is you start your XRDP in debug mode. So you manually start the remote desktop in debug mode, and that will allow you to have more than one concurrent session. Now, there are some negatives they list in here, but I'll leave that to the user to read through those. This workaround two is using the dbus launch approach. And basically it's a different way of using, launching the session so that you can, again, get multiple iterations. And this one also has limitations, so that it'll list these out, and that way you can make your best choice. And then workaround three is unsetting the dbus session bus address approach. And it'll let you go in and have more than one login as well. So simplest, like I said, is just, only have one login at a time with your remote desktop. But if you have to have more than one for some reason, you now have some workarounds that can actually be used to have multiple remote connections.
All right. Very cool. I've also seen something similar with the black screen when you try to use multiple remote login solutions together. So I've got a server where we have virtualized Windows install, and somebody else remotes into it with, I can't remember which solution they use. Maybe it's TeamViewer or something like that. And whenever they're logged into it with TeamViewer, I try to get into it with Spice, which is what's used in libvirt. It will not work. Just gives me a black screen. It's like, I have to call them. Can you log out of the server for a minute? Well, so there could be multiple causes for that, but good to know.
Yeah, and I had no idea that double logging like that would cause. I just thought, I could have a couple concurrent sessions, and nope, you cannot. Not easily.
Yes.
By default.
Indeed. There's also a way, I haven't done this for a while, but there's also a way that you can set it up where so when you go to do like a remote desktop connection, you could set up to give you a new remote desktop, or you can set it up to give you the already existing remote desktop. There's some fun stuff there as well. All right. Well, hey, that's our tips. I'll let each of you get a plug in real quick if you want to, before we let everybody go. Jeff, you have anything you want to plug? Jeff is muted. He will remember to unmute himself. Do not fear.
Yes, I switched and I lost my window, and I was like, oh crap, I can't unmute myself. Nothing really to say. You can always find me on the Discord server here, and I will just end with Poetry Corner. Aborted effort. Close all that you have. You ask way too much. Have a great week, everybody.
Nice. All right, and David, anything you want to plug?
No, I have nothing to plug either. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not active pretty much anywhere other than Discord. But you're already here if you're watching this. So find me on the Floss Discord on Wednesdays. Find me on ULS Discord on Saturdays. And other than that, just keep Linuxing.
There you go. I like it. All right. Thank you guys both for being here. The only thing I will plug is remember Hackaday. We've got the security column goes live at pretty much every Friday morning. We haven't missed one for quite a while. I think I took Christmas and Thanksgiving off, but other than that, we haven't missed one for a long time. And then, of course, Floss Weekly, we do on Wednesdays. Would love to see you over there. Have some fun stuff coming up. We're speaking of the Raspberry Pi initial public offering, we're actually talking to Eben Upton here in about a month. So if you have any specific questions for him, let me know and I can make sure and ask them. Looking forward to that. Thank you everyone for watching. Those on the live in the Discord and those on the download, we appreciate it very much. And hey, we will see you next time on the Untitled Linux Show.